Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Niomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. Now, today we're doing a recap episode and we're recapping the interview I had with Leda Mitrofanis. Now, Leda is a self-development counselor, teacher, published author, and she's also the founder and director of Simply Leda. So she looks at mainly her purpose, and what we spoke about in the podcast was self-identity. And we looked at how subconscious patterns can impact our self-identity. So our subconscious patterns and our subconscious programming comes from a place of wanting to help us. So the way that we think, feel, or behave at this particular moment in our life has been shaped from events that have happened through our lives. And our subconscious believes it's helpful for us. So even if we don't believe it's helpful, at some point it was, and that's why the subconscious grabbed onto it. So what this can do, though, is this can give, I don't know if a false identity or a mistaken identity piece for people, in that they think they are something, but in the deep crux of things, they're really not. And although we may think that, we're achieving and we're doing great things, that comes from the programming we've had as a child, or throughout a lifetime. If we are stick it to the man, not following rules, going to be in my own space, that too has come from somewhere. If we are overly caring of people and put others' needs before ourselves, that has come from somewhere. And if we're in a space where we think everything's wrong and everyone's against us and there's nothing we can do right, that has come from somewhere. And even the anxiety and other issues that have arisen come from somewhere, right? And our subconscious grabs onto this and we think that's who we are. But really, if we really dig deep, we can actually come into who we truly are and what our identity really is. And that's the work that Leda does. So in order to know where you're going, you need to first know yourself, right? And knowing yourself first. And so having that self-identity piece is crucial. And so Leda and I spoke about that a fair bit on, how important it is. And one of those elements is coming back to our authentic selves and showing up in a space of integrity, right? So although there's many leadership traits, leadership encompasses a range of traits, but the key trait of a successful leader is integrity. And, Leda shared that with us, and that was her belief. And I tend to agree with her. And sometimes, though, people misunderstand what integrity means. So integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. Integrity is doing what is right for us, right? And for the people around us, and showing up in an authentic space. And so being authentic and being our authentic selves comes from a place of loving ourselves. And so self-identity is really strongly connected with self-love. And, embodying the virtues that we have, they're the same qualities that we find and value in a good leader, the authenticity, the integrity, being able to communicate in a space without triggering other people, having that self-love for self and for the team members. All of these things, all these virtues and really strong values come out in the qualities of us as leaders and in our lives as well. So one of the things we also talked about, and this is something I'm learning more, right? So for those of you who know, I'm an avid learner, always learning, getting qualifications, informal learning, doing different courses, attending different events, all of that sort of stuff fills my cup. It's one of my little virtues, right? Is self-improvement and growth. And I'm a sponge. I want to learn so much. But the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know too. Don't get me wrong. But one of the things I've learned about self and my own personal growth and the way I've moved on my own healing journey is it's actually less about what we put in and more about what we take out. It's taking out what no longer works for us and what's no longer serving us. And so, as I see it, we're born into this world pretty much a clean slate. Well, mostly a clean slate, but we won't go into that here, right? Because, for those of you that believe that, there's other lives that we've had that can imprint as well in this life. But let's say we come in as a clean slate. So we come in as this clean slate, and then we have these experiences with caregivers and teachers and all these other people in our lives, peers and all those sorts of things that create in us a belief system and subconscious programming that has us show up in a particular way. And the way we're showing up is a way that we've had to show up in order to stay safe in our, lifetime, in how we've grown and what we've learned. But some of these behaviors, thoughts, feelings that we have, we've actually created but may no longer be serving us. So as I see it, I think we spend the first, half of our lives getting all of this programming, learning all this stuff, socializing, fitting in. And then we get to about the middle of our life. And this is where midlife crisis normally comes in, right? And we go, oh, who really am I? And we start doing a bit of digging. And that's when we start shedding some of these things that we no longer need or we no longer have serving us, right? Because we want to come into a space where we can be who we are. And Leda and I also touch a little bit on people that are resistant to change or don't want to change. And I've come across many of those people, right? They're like, oh, I'm who I am. And if people don't like it, that's their problem. Yeah, I don't agree. You are who you are because of things that have happened through your life, but that doesn't mean that's who you truly are from a self-identity piece, right? That's who you've created. You are who you've created. And so some people really get stuck in that space and some refuse to change. Some people hate change and refuse to go into that space. And that's usually based around fear, right? They're kind of like, well, if I'm not this, who am I? Right. If I go and work on this piece and I'm no longer seen to be known for, being the outspoken one or being the one that gets everything done all the time and always busy, if I'm not known for those things, who am I? What am I known for? And so there's a fear that it will actually impact us. And so sometimes there's a resistance to change because people have a bit of a fear of their life being overturned. And it's really stepping into the unknown because once we start this work and once we start exploring, we don't know what we're going to find a lot of the time. And a lot of people are hesitant about that. And I've spoken to people about RTT, which is the modality I do, which goes in and looks at things that have happened, throughout your lifetime, which have created how you're presenting now in whatever thought, feeling, or behavior that you don't want to be doing. But, I've had some people that I've spoken to about that went, oh, I don't know if I want to find that out. And that's coming from that unknown space. I don't know what it's going to be. And I don't know if I'm ready to step into that space, right? Because that's sort of the healing. And so it can be painful to change. And for a lot of people, it's safer to stay in that comfort zone than it is to step outside and start exploring. But, we need to be willing to tolerate a comfort zone, or sorry, we shouldn't be willing to tolerate a comfort zone that's no longer serving us. But sometimes we do until it's too painful to handle, and it's too painful to stay there. Then people are more willing to change. Then people are more willing to do that exploration or start trying new things and undoing all of this programming and digging into these and overturning belief systems, right? And digging into these programming that's happening. So I talk a little bit about how I deal with the huge impacts in my life. Although I must say I do have this theory of part of my growth aspect is if I'm growing, continually evolving and continually embracing that, then usually life doesn't throw things that are too big my way, right? Because I'm already on this growth path. However, from time to time, it still will. And, last year was quite a tricky year for me with a lot of change in my life and a lot of unwanted change, unplanned change that I do now have gratitude for. But when you're in amongst that, it's like, sitting in a whole heap of manure, right? And it stinks and it smells and it's uncomfortable and it's sticky and it's really yuck. But when we look back at some point, we can one day have a look and go, that was really fertilizer. But the thing is, when we're in it, that's not how it feels. It's because we're in it and we're overwhelmed by it. Whereas when we look back, we can sometimes take the position of the observer. Now, not everyone can do that. Some people look back and are instantly back in it. So they could never see it as fertilizer. But when we're looking at finding our self identity, that's about looking back and exploring and looking at things as an observer and trying to break away the things that are no longer serving us. You know, um, One of the things that leaders spoke about is learning about ourselves through the challenges of relationships or from other people. And as leaders, don't we do that, right? There's so many different personalities we come across and so many different versions of people that a lot of the times do challenge us and sometimes hold a mirror up to us without us realizing. So we can be triggered in a range of different ways, or we can become frustrated or want to just give up on particular people sometimes because they test us so much. But that's kind of, if we look at it in the right way, that's kind of how we can learn about ourselves. If we become curious about them and then become curious about why we're reacting in that particular way, then we can actually have our own growth and learn more about ourselves in this space. And once we step into there, then we can be aware. We can acknowledge what we see in that space and then make changes, right? To create a better belief system, thought pattern, behavior, emotion, whatever that may be moving forward. And it can help improve the way we show up as leaders and in life. So, another thing that can sort of be a barrier to people wanting to change is, they may feel that if they change, that means that they were wrong for the way that they were thinking, feeling, or behaving up until that point, right? And it's not about looking at that and going, oh, I was wrong to do that, or that was a horrible way to be, or I have regret, shame, guilt. You can't do that because we are who we are, where we are at this particular point in time, and there's no blame for that. But if we sit in that and we don't make the changes, that's where we feel the pain. And so once we make those changes, we can look back and I'll be honest, the person I was 20 years ago isn't the person I am today. And I'm very big on not having shame and guilt because I believe that everywhere we've been and everything we've done has led us to where we are now. So I have gratitude in that space, but not everyone frames that way. And so they may look back and feel a lot of shame and guilt for the way that they were. I've done a lot of forgiveness with myself, and I've also hope that other people probably have forgiven me for some of my behaviors that weren't ideal throughout my lifetime. But I've had to make peace with that and come into a space. Whereas now I'm really in a really good space where I have a love of people, and I always want to bring the best out in people, and that's what drives me a lot more now, rather than my programming at the time. So if I go back 20 years, my programming was quite a vindictive element of programming. If someone crossed me, then it was, how dare you cross me? And that's an injustice. And I have to now defend that and defend my honor. And we go into a really reactive space. Whereas now I can see that, that was triggering me because of my values. So I have a lot of value around honesty and integrity and authenticity. And when people didn't show up like that to me, when they lied and betrayed me, it really triggered me. And I had to actually learn and understand that it wasn't about me. Like, even though they were lying to me and they were betraying me, it was more about their programming on what they were taught or what they learnt was an acceptable way to be. And so that's not on me, that's on them. And so I've been able to reframe that now and see things a lot differently. And if someone does that to me, does it still sting? Yeah, I'm still going through, right? I'm still doing this healing. Life is a complete evolution. I'm definitely not at the end right now. And every time I think I'm at the end, something happens to shake me up again, right? But it's continual. And I'm in a place where I can notice that and I can feel that come through and go, oh, that was a bit triggering. And then I get curious and I explore it.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Niomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Niomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgroconsulting.com.au.
And, Leda always also said that the reason why relationships can do this to us is, we can be we're triggered about the opinions of the people that we care about. And now, even if someone is in your team and you don't think you care about them, you've got an energetic connection with them of some kind, right? And because you've got that there, then you do care about what they think when it comes to you. And I've always said, I don't care what people think about me. But there's a part of me that does, right? That I do care what people think about me. That's why I brush my hair. That's why I brush my teeth. That's why I show up in particular ways, in particular spaces. If we didn't care what people thought about us, then we probably wouldn't get out of our pajamas because let's be honest, they're really comfy. But, so we are social animals and we are socialized. However, we can't let people's opinions about us trigger us, right, into behaving in ways, thinking in ways, and feeling in ways that don't feel authentic or aligned with us. That's the key. And that's where that healing journey leads us to. And, sometimes as well, when we are triggered, they've touched on something, there's a raw nerve, and they've touched on something that has a little truth. Now, it might not be a universal truth, but it's a truth in our belief systems. And so that's why it's important to explore that and then really look at it and go, is this really a truth or is this something that's resulted from my programming? And then how do I process that and move it forward so I'm not triggered in the future? So I've worked on this a fair bit and I still slip up. So we're all human, right? But the leaders that I've had, the really good leaders, and the way I like to show up in the leadership space is trying to get myself into a space of neutrality, no matter what the trigger. So someone tries to trigger me, just remaining in that neutral space and showing up from there. And then I can override the amygdala hijack, right? And I think that's the key for a leader is overriding that hijack, right? Just because we're biologically programmed to go there doesn't mean we have to. And I often say there's 3 things that we can control in this life, and only 3. And that is the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave. Everything else is an illusion of control. And so that amygdala hijack, we can stop that if we want to. And it's not easy. And it doesn't happen every time, but the more we consistently do it, the more we actually get our neuroprogramming in place. And with practice comes progress, right? We get better at it. So Leda also spoke about being a place of strong self-love. And that's what this work does, right? Because once we start pulling off all of this programming and ditching and removing the things that are no longer serving us, we really can get to know ourselves and be comfortable in our own skin. And that's really what self-love is. Now, I'm a big advocate for self-care, going and doing all those things, getting massages, day spas, walking in nature, whatever it is for you. But self-love is also about brutal self-honesty, right? Self-love isn't about a world of denial where we always go, I'm amazing, I'm the best, and put ourselves on pedestals. That's not self-love. Self-love is really coming back into that space of going, I really want to feel comfortable with who I am and how I show up. How can I go about doing that? And when we're in a place of really strong self love, we're either unable to, or people find it really difficult to trigger us because we've removed those things that are triggering within us, right? And we've been comfortable with who we show up. And that comes a little bit from that inner work. And that helps us become more effective as it helps us build the muscle. Like I said, so, the more we do something, the more that becomes our natural response. And we can actually, for those who know about it, there's this neuroplasticity that says we can rewire the neurons in our brain. They're not fixed. And that's what we do from when we're first born, right? The things that happen around us, and this is how this programming works, the things that happen around us program us to behave, feel, and think in particular ways, which then set off the neurons and the synapses in our brain. And so then that's how we respond and that's how we react. However, we can react in more neutral ways. We don't have to react in triggered ways. So as we do this internal work and as we remove all of the unnecessary bits and pieces, we can come really more connected to ourselves, have that strong self-love. And this improves our internal compass, right? And strengthens our intuition. And our strengthened intuition and our internal compass comes from our spiritual identity. And once we've tapped into our self-identity, the next step to level up is that spiritual identity. And that's where we can come into a space to flourish. And I had someone ask me the other day, there's this thrive rather than survive. And she said, the key is I would love to know how I can flourish. And knowing how to flourish comes from that really strong spiritual connection, and that strong belief that those three things I can control: thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Everything else is out of my control, but I can control these three things. And when we come in and we follow our intuition and we're in an authentic space and we're driven from that place and tapping into that spiritual identity and enhancing that, that's when we really level up, right? That's when our reframing goes to that community level thinking. So some of you may be aware I talk about me, we, and community level thinking. So me level thinking is it's all about me. What am I going to get? How am I going to get it? This is all, don't really consider other people. We level thinking is, okay, my little bubble, that's what I consider. Community level thinking is what's the best for all? Like what's going to serve the overall good. And that's like the rare air, as one of my guests, Chris Cowan, talked about, right? That's going up into a space where not many people access, but that's where flourishing comes in. So, the more we can manage our triggers, the more we build that muscle. And that's why Leda has come up with this 4-book series, right? So they all cover the self-identity, as I mentioned before. I think I did anyway. We did in the podcast. It's called The Human Case of Mistaken Identity. So her first book is Me, Myself, and I. The Holy Trinity for some people, right? Not for others, though. And so it looks at, who am I? What is this myself? What is the I? What is that made up? Her second book is about self-love, and it's the journey home, and it's coming back into who you truly are and where that sits. And then she's got book 3 and book 4, which are yet to be released. So she's currently working on those. But as I said before, that self-love is radical self-acceptance, but it is being radically honest about yourself, to yourself. It's about self-knowledge. It's about acknowledgement. It's about self-trust. And most of all, it's about self-forgiveness, because we've all done things that we're not proud of or that don't fit with who we truly feel we are, but we've still done them, and we need to forgive ourselves for that. But with forgiveness, there's 2 elements that I want to cover here. So when we forgive something, we don't need to forget. And also when we forgive, we don't go and do it again, right? So they're the 2 elements that we need to think about with forgiveness. So she talks about taking those fundamentals and applying them to yourself and then see what you come up with. So the book is a guide to guide you through this whole process on how you can do that. We also talked about the ego, the true self, and the false ego, and that's covered in her book series as well, and identifying how they each impact, again, the way we think, behave, and feel. And they can show up in our patterns. But once we see those patterns, then that allows us to heal those patterns. And this is where curiosity is really important. And I bang on about curiosity all the time. But when we come from a place of curiosity, we're not coming from a place of being triggered. And so we can be more of an observer rather than covered in whatever's there, and allows us to see more clearly. So Leda's whole process and purpose is to help people reclaim their authentic self-identity, right? And live in that place and live from there, rather than this identity that someone else or many other people have created for us. And yeah, we talked about it being a lifelong process, and I've already mentioned that. And as Leda says, it's like constantly peeling back the layers of an onion, right? There's no quick fix. And even things like RTT, although there's one session creates the change people are after most of the time, it can be up to 3 sessions depending on how deep the imprint is and the client that I'm seeing. But they usually, when I see them later on, they're kind of like, oh, now I've dealt with this. This has popped up. And that's what Leda was saying about the layers of the onion, right? Once we peel off something, it gives permission for something else to come through. So life's always going to bring us what we need to look at. And if we have acceptance around that, we can come from a place of curiosity and start and continue doing that exploring. So, that inner work can raise things that we think we've sorted out, but may still be embedded in the subconscious. And I heard once, and I just love this saying, it's a different level, same devil. And so even with myself, I get to a point where I've got this growth, and in my business or in my career or in my parenting and friendships or relationships, whatever it is, I think, yeah, I'm leveling up here. And then it comes through and I've got to deal with it again because it's a different environment. And so it comes through to see if it can rattle and shake. And it's about doing that exploring and helping the healing. So, Leda just reaffirmed that our entire life is a process, but some people are about the destination, thinking that when they get there, there's going to be this magic point, where they can stop. But the magic really happens in the process. That's where the gold is. And that inner work is going to find you, right? If you work on growing, then life doesn't have to force you to. Or when things come at you from life, you're better equipped to be able to process and deal with them. And it improves your resilience and your capabilities in that space. And I'm not saying that you won't get flawed, because last year I was flawed. However, my bounce back has been a lot better than what I had imagined it could have been, purely because of the work that I've done. But the truth is, pain is inevitable. Pain's a part of human life. Even the Buddha says there is suffering, but the Buddha also says this suffering can end, and gives principles around that. And suffering really is only temporary, and it's really based on our perspective, right? And the way that we can frame things sometimes can help us move through pain quicker, especially when we realize it's a teacher and we go into that curiosity space. We talk about feel and deal as well, and that's allowing the things to come through. So one of the things I did, early on in my life was I used to suppress all of my emotions. I would be like, oh, that's happened. That's yuck, but I need to get on with it. And I would push everything down. And that's made my healing journey a little bit trickier. But it also put me in a position of where I would get triggered. I would do those things that I'm now not proud of, right? Because things would happen and that emotion would be waiting to explode. And I just was doing things that weren't really authentic I didn't feel were authentic to me, but were a survival reaction to me because I hadn't processed that, volcano that was waiting to erupt. And authenticity is what makes a great leader. So When we can actually be in that space where we've done the healing and we've got our energy vibration there, we need to match that with our behaviors. Because when they're not aligned, then people may not trust you, right? Things just don't feel right in that space. Have you ever met someone and they're saying something, but it just doesn't feel like they really mean it? It's usually because their energy is not aligned to that. And although it's a very subtle feeling, we can't see it and pinpoint it. We feel it, and that's happening with us and others as well. So we have to be conscious of that. But, at the end of the day, it's when we feel like the life that we're living right now is no longer working for us, that's when we need to start asking ourselves those questions, right? When that pain becomes too much, when that behavior, thought, or feeling that we're actually enacting is no longer serving or working for us, then that's the time to take the step. And it's about sometimes just surrendering into where you are at that point in time and exploring and becoming curious about what might have brought you there. And when we surrender, it doesn't mean pulling in and being weak. It means opening up, having acceptance over where we are and over where we're headed, and try and come in and show up as our best version of ourselves. Um, so I think that covered a lot. Still got a couple of notes here, but that's covered most of it. Um, one thing that Leda did say, one of her mantras was no head above our own, which means that it's your life, it's your journey, and you know what is best for you. And so if that is moving into this space of exploring and becoming curious and creating change and finding what your self-identity is, then kudos to you. But if you're in a space where you're not ready for that or you don't feel it's necessary, then also kudos to you, right? I'm not here to tell people what they should and shouldn't be doing. All I'm here doing on this podcast is just giving people hints and tips that might be able to make their life easier or enhance their leadership. And I think the beauty of us all humans is we're all in different places, in different spaces, and it's in the journey, right? That's where the magic happens. Excuse me. So that's it for this podcast. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Leda and I hope you got some gold nuggets. If you haven't listened to it, obviously go back, have a listen because it was a really great conversation. And as always, thank you for joining me and I look forward to serving you in our next episode. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.